Hello, welcome to the You Law in Black and White podcast. I'm your host, Aaminah Barber, and I'm joined today by.
Swanpoel, hello.
Hi, Ilke.
Hello.
Before we kind of get into what this podcast is about, why don't you tell the listeners a bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm 26. I'm studying at U Law at the moment. I'm doing my BPC course with Aaminah. Um, I did my master's at U Law before that. I did that in Manchester. Um, Kind of the law area that I'm looking towards is probably family or maybe public law, mainly dealing with trusts and wills if I can. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Brilliant. So the topic of discussion today is ADHD. We're going to be looking at like what ADHD is, how it impacts your life, any stigma attached to it. What do you think about institutions and workplaces? Are they inclusive and helpful for people with ADHD? And what more can be done, if anything can be done? And we'll finish off with any tips and tricks that you have used that have helped. Just a quick disclaimer before we do dive into today's episode. I want to make it clear that the views and opinions expressed on this podcast are our own and do not reflect you law at all. The information provided in this podcast is for general information purposes only and should not be considered as professional advice. If you do require expert advice, we encourage you to consult with relevant experts or professionals. And I probably should have mentioned this at the start, but you are someone who actually does have ADHD, isn't that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I was diagnosed 2 years ago, maybe a bit more. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's ADHD like? Well, let's start with what is ADHD and what type of ADHD you have, because from my understanding, there's more than just one type.
Yeah, that's correct. So if I kind of have to give a more scientific answer to this, I would say so to explain the name of it, it's an attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. You can have the attention deficit or the hyperactivity, or you can have both. So I was diagnosed with both. I've got attention deficit and hyperactivity, which is great. Um, it's essentially a dopamine deficit disorder, which means that your brain doesn't produce enough dopamine for you to kind of effectively run your life. It's considered a neurodevelopmental disorder, which pretty much means that it can't be cured. So it's kind of put in a different category to things like anxiety and depression and other mental health disorders because it affects your brain. So your brain functions differently. So you learn things differently, you communicate, move, your emotions are different, you have a different kinds of responses to attention. Um, and it's defined, I guess, through an analysis of your behavior. So generally people with ADHD will have quite a persistent pattern of inattention or obviously hyperactivity, impulsivity, and this is kind of some things that interfere with your day-to-day functioning and development. So I can go into more about the symptoms later on if you'd like.
Yeah, we will cover a few symptoms a little later on. Um, but for you personally, um, you've mentioned that you've got the attention deficit as well as the hyperactivity aspect of it. So moving on to the symptoms, bit of foresight there. What are some of the common symptoms and like which ones do you have? Is that the right way to phrase it?
Yeah, I get display. I don't really know. Yeah, what symptoms have I got? I've got pretty much most of them. I think anyone with ADHD will. They'll cover any grounds. And also, just as like a preface, some of the symptoms that people that have ADHD, display or have, it's not exclusive to ADHD. You can get this in other um, kind of mental health disorders or with autism. There's some overlap in any case. But one of the big ones for ADHD specifically is executive dysfunction. I'm going to use some buzzwords as I go through them, but executive dysfunction. So that's kind of, if I had to explain it, an impairment in the ability to manage your own thoughts, actions, and emotions. I would describe it as a paralysis to be able to do anything at all. I was kind of looking on TikTok before because sometimes it just really helps me get advice from there when I can't process my thoughts by myself. And there was a good analogy, and I've seen it quite a few times about putting your hand on a hot hob. So you're standing there, you're looking at this really hot hob. You have the ability, you have the motor skills to do it. You can put your hand there. Your brain just isn't giving you the permission to do it. It's almost like it's saying, no, this is going to be too painful. It's not worth it. You can tell yourself constantly, put your hand there, do it. Other people can tell you to do it, but the fact is your brain just says no. So that's kind of how I view executive dysfunction. You and as a real life example, you want to have a shower. You then instead sit on your bed and think of every single step that you need to do before the shower, during the shower, and after the shower. It's not a simple fact of I'm just going to get in the shower and then I'm going to get on with my day. It's I need to brush my hair, set up my clothes, get any kind of products that I need. Then I need to get in the shower. Then I need to wash my hair, wash my body, wash my face, do this. Then I need to get out of the shower, dry myself. There's so many steps, whereas someone just considers it as one as just shower. Um, and there was actually a guy on TikTok called Ben Carpenter. He's lovely. He's great in terms of helping with like health advice more than anything. But he had a chronic illness and he kind of saw things in a different way. I don't think it's his theory. I feel like it'd be wrong for me to say it's his theory. I feel like it's a general one, but it's called the spoon theory. I don't know if you've heard of it, Aaminah, but basically it's so say you have in a day, you have 10 spoons that you use up on all the things that you need to do. Someone that doesn't really struggle with many things or is quite neurotypical, or doesn't have a chronic illness, for example, will have 10 spoons in their day. So we all have 10 spoons. They will use one spoon on working, and then they'll use one spoon on cooking, and then they'll use one spoon on going out or cleaning the house, etc. And their spoons get used up in that kind of way. When you have a chronic illness or neurodivergence or mental health problems, your spoons tend to divvy up quite differently. So for me, for example, I hate showering. I'm going to keep using this analogy because I hate showering. I do it. Don't worry, I'm not smelly. Um, but for someone that's quite neurotypical, doesn't suffer from many or any disorders, showering to them will take up one spoon. Showering to me takes up three because of how much energy it takes out of me to even think about showering, then doing it, and then thinking after. It will take up three spoons. I then have maybe I've got to get out of bed. A lot of the time, like he gave a great example of for him, getting out of bed used to be four spoons. I'd say maybe getting out of bed for me is two spoons because I really struggle. And so then I've used, three spoons on showering, two spoons on getting out of bed. That's 5 out of 10 spoons used my day. I then have to either go to class or I have to do some work. I have to go to the gym. I have to make food. I have to clean the house, and they will also take up an extra amount of spoons. So it's extremely tiring, is a way to put it, and especially when you're not doing things that make you happy because, as I said before, it's a dopamine deficit disorder. You just don't want to do things that you don't think are very relevant. Coming back to the hob, you just say no. um
So going
then
back.
there's also kind of
Oh,
yeah,
so
yeah.
don't mean to interrupt you, but going back to the
No, no.
shower analogy that you had about how you have to think of all the steps before actually getting into the shower, what you have to do whilst in the shower, and then getting out. Do you have to actually do all of those steps before you can actually will yourself to get into the shower? So do you have to like take your clothes out, take your products out, then like grab your towels? Do you have to do all of that before in order to actually get to the showering part? Or is it just like steps in your head that you have to check off?
Yeah, I mean, it's both in my opinion. So for me, like my personal experience is that well, in general, ADHDers um always permanently have steps in their head in every single way that they need to do. This is actually where a lot of the executive dysfunctioning comes from, because you are paralyzed by all of the thoughts that are in your head. And I won't just be having singular thoughts about the shower. It'll be that I need to shower and I need to go through all those steps. But at the very same time, it'll be, but I also need to go and do my work and I need to get there for 9. And then I need to get the train and then I need to get up and then I need to get out and then I need to do this, but I need to do that. And and this will come on to another symptom of memory, because we have a terrible, terrible memory. So then the steps become really overwhelming because you don't want to forget things. So say I've got a plan to leave the house by 9. I then go through every single step in my head of every single possible thing that needs to happen and every single possible outcome of the day so that I don't forget things. But then I get overwhelmed because then, it's so many thoughts going through my head. I then just stop. I just don't do it. So instead of doing the task, I just stop and think about the task constantly. So I
So
think in terms of me myself, I make steps. So I make the physical steps so that I don't get overwhelmed.
So then with like timing, like you said, that you've got to think about if you've got to be out for 9, you've got to think about everything before that. So if I were to say to you like, oh, I will wake you up at 7, does that mean I have to wake you up at like 7 on the dot, or would it be better for someone like yourself to be woken up like 10 minutes before 7 because 7 o'clock is not 7 o'clock, it's 10 minutes before 7. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Yes, I probably would agree with that. I think there's quite a running joke that you kind of need to give me a fake time because like timing is just awful. And I give myself fake times. Like if I need to get to class, I'll be really realistic. I think one of the things is and I've noticed this with a few of like if I've got friends with ADHD or just on TikTok and stuff, and we all seem to overestimate our abilities. And we all think that I can do a shower, cook food, get dressed, do my makeup, pack my bag in 10 minutes. And I've never done it in my entire life. That I have never been able to do that. For
I
some
don't think
reason,
anybody
today,
can. That's
I
a
feel like I
lot.
could. Yeah.
That's a
But
lot.
I'm just like in my head, I'm like, look, I can do it and I will do it because I just don't have like in my brain telling me that maybe you should be a bit realistic about this. There's nothing there.
So it was safe to say that it impacts your life a lot, especially with like timings and stuff.
Definitely. I would say timings is I mean, I've gotten better because I mean, I went to school, I've been at uni, I had jobs. I've learned that you have to follow times, but then it comes at the detriment of myself and that I've neglected something else in my life to make sure that I meet up, you know, someone else's standards.
Wow. That's, I feel like that's a
Mm.
lot to think about in such a short period, just to do like simple things that most people don't think about.
Yeah, well, that's why I quite like the analogy of the spoon theory because it's not just a shower for me. It's more. It's the whole
Yeah.
day, and then yeah, and then I shower,
And then
or I don't. Sometimes it gets too overwhelming. I just go and make food.
that is so real. Food is life. I'm so
Yeah.
with it. We've talked about this before, so this is definitely like a reoccurring conversation for us, but definitely for the listeners who have never heard this before. You told me something that's called masking, and that's like to try and cover up your symptoms by copying other people's behaviors, like who don't have like either ADHD or autism or like depression or whatever the kind of oh, what's the word that I'm looking for? Disorder isn't the right word. Neither is symptom. I can't think
Oh,
of
well,
it, but whatever like they have, and they mask other people who don't have those to kind of like fit in and avoid being
yes.
stigmatized and stuff. So like, how has that, is that something that you've personally like done unknowingly, like unconsciously, or is that something that you've kind of thought, I mean, I am what I am, you have to put up with it. Like you, what you see is what you get.
Yeah, I think yeah, masking's quite a huge topic, and actually, this kind of I think when I spoke to you about it, and I'll bring it up now in context to the pandemic, because I noticed with myself, especially, I mean, generally in my life, so I'll preface this with kind of the end bit of your question. I have learned to like myself quite a lot. I I struggle to hate myself. I mean, don't get me wrong, I have confidence issues. I can struggle with kind of, you know, feeling like almost what's the word? Oh, I'll come back to that. But I do have issues within myself, but in terms of letting other people make me feel certain ways, I don't really I don't personally get impacted by that. But I do still mask and I do still feel myself masking in day-to-day life. especially when you're at university or when you're doing a job or anything like that. You kind of need to play a game. It feels like you're playing a game. And I think I know, like, I've got a lot of autistic friends and I've got other ADHDers, etc., people with depression, anxiety. We all say the same thing. You feel like you're playing a game because you kind of have to go through a lot of unwritten rules, I guess. So for example, when we were in the pandemic, we were only around ourselves and our family who know us very, very well. Um, and so we just stopped masking. We were more grumpy. We didn't need to do all the small talk. We didn't need to fake being nice. We just could just be ourselves entirely. And then you come out of the pandemic and you suddenly feel yourself extremely exhausted. And you also feel people reacting to you differently and looking at you like you're being awkward and a bit strange. And you realize that, oh God, it's because I've been masking the whole time before that. And now you're seeing like a bit more truth to who I am, and you don't like it because it's not very lack for a better word, polite, I would say, especially in British culture, things generally have to be very polite and follow some kind of like unwritten structure. Um, and I think that's kind of what masking does all the time. And I know, and this will come into the stigma, but I can go on to it later as well. But as a girl, a young girl, with autism or ADHD, you are generally overlooked because of your ability to mask extremely hard. So I might be struggling entirely with all of my work and it's overwhelming me to the extent where I want to throw things, I want to scream, I want to cry. But in class, I want my teacher to think I'm good. So I will just pretend like everything is okay. And even if they ask a single question about anything that I'm struggling with, I will say I'm fine. I will then go home and have the biggest screaming match with my mum ever because I've had to spend the whole day faking who I am, basically. And I know a lot of girls specifically, but also men, can really struggle with this element because it's really tiring because it feels like you're putting, like, as the word says, a mask on.
You're like two separate people, essentially.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one for the outside world and one for yourself.
I had a question and that's completely gone from my mind. Hold on. Um, oh, I've lost it. If I remember, I'll come back to it. But when you talked about like masking and stuff, you said that like you felt like you had to like play a game and like people would look at you and you'd know things are polite and aren't polite. Is that something that you kind of think about a lot, like something that you obsess over within your own time? Like, why did I say this? Why did I do that? I should have done it like this. Like, do you have to like have these experiences to know what is like more quote unquote socially acceptable, especially like in British culture? Or is that something that you can
Yeah,
feel
definitely.
at the moment?
No, I think that's correct. I think when I was younger, I and this is so funny. I just kind of assumed personalities of other people because I saw that they were getting received better for the way that they acted and the way that they spoke. And I know this is like I will put this under the umbrella of neurodiversity here because this definitely affects people with autism quite a lot as well. Um, you learn, you say something, it's not received well, you kind of go home, you take back from you, and you kind of obsess over what you said wrong. Eventually, you figure it out, and I'm grateful, not always grateful for it, but sometimes grateful for social media because you get other people that have picked it up quicker than you. And so for example, they'll be like, did you know that you are supposed to make eye contact with people when you speak to them? But actually, and this is one of the newer things that was circulating social media recently. But actually it's not physical eye contact. You don't have to look them directly in the eyes. You just need to look at their face because a lot of the time neurodiverse people just want to look away because it helps them concentrate. Um, so it's like working on things like that. And yeah, learning all of the small talks, learning that you kind of need to get to know someone on the very, very surface level before you can ask them quite an intrusive question. Whereas when you're dealing with other neurodiverse people, I think you can sniff them out quite quickly because neither of you care for the small talk and you're quite happily go into all of the deep, dark political or whatever it is that you want to talk about issues within the space of 10 minutes. Um, so yeah,
You're just cutting
it's
through it and being
definitely
like,
different.
we want to talk about the important stuff.
Let's cut through all of the niceties because neither of us actually care about what your favorite meal is. I don't. I'm sorry.
I personally like that. I think that's a good thing. Sometimes small talk can be really, really tedious, especially when you're trying to get them to speak about something. You're like, how do I weave it in? And it's just, yeah, it's just a whole song and dance about it.
Yeah.
I personally am not a fan. But
You know.
like, do you like feel stigmatized when like you tell people that you've got ADHD, or if they recognize symptoms themselves because they're quite well read on the topic? Do you feel as if like or if you tell people that, oh, I have ADHD, you're going to be treated a certain way or at least viewed a certain way?
Yeah, I would say there is, I mean, of most of it, ADHD is definitely getting quite heavy reputation at the moment. I think if I had to break it down, I can start with the child stigma and the adult stigma. So I kind of went into the being a girl with neurodivergence, how it's really hard to get taken seriously because you mask so well. And on the same side or the other side of the coin, being a child with ADHD, they will only really consider you to have it if you're naughty and loud or disruptive or you're a boy, because generally ADHD, historically was diagnosed based on how little boys behaved in class or at home. Um, and only recently, we've learned more about how ADHD can present in women. In fact, actually, this brings up a point that I just wanted to make quite briefly about the BBC panorama that came out, because I think it's not only added to the stigma, it's put on an extra push of panic and quite a large amount of moral panic towards ADHD, which is making a lot of people. Do you know the panorama?
The show, I think that's the only one I can think of.
So it's no, so it's the panorama documentary about how private, um, what are they called? Practices, I guess, are over-diagnosing people with ADHD and over-medicating them.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. No, I didn't know that, but
so it basically, yeah, so it went through like a few bits. I watched it briefly. It made me quite frustrated, to be honest. It was about a guy who doesn't have ADHD, who went to a few, I think it was like three, maybe four, ADHD private ADHD places to get a diagnosis. They all gave him the diagnosis and all said, "Yeah, you've clearly got it," blah blah. And he then did an extensive NHS ADHD test, and it came back that he didn't have ADHD. And so it was the BBC kind of saying, "Look, you shouldn't be going to private places. They don't do it properly. They're just trying to diagnose you for the sake of it. They just want your money, etc., etc." My rebuttal to this is that we have an extremely overworked, underpaid NHS. There is a 5+ year backlog of getting ADHD uh, diagnosis. There's medication shortages at the moment. I know so many people. It's a not worldwide, sorry, nationwide issue in that people can't actually even get their own medication because the factories aren't making enough. And then you get the BBC Panorama focusing on the one place where people are able to, and if they're financially able to as well, obviously this is a select few people, me being one of them, of course, but where people are actually able to fight their own corner instead of having, and this is another part of the stigma, GPs telling them that their ADHD just doesn't exist because, okay, one reason being maybe you're a woman, you're an adult woman, and maybe you're middle-aged or, somewhere around that age. Well, you've survived for this long, so you can't have ADHD because you're not struggling that much. Little do they know that, you cry every single day because you can't even get out of bed because you don't, for example, want to have a shower. I spent every single day of my life not wanting to do anything and leaving it until the last minute at the very best that I could. And it ruins your mental health because you don't spend those days where you're not doing the work relaxing. You spend those days stressing and doubting yourself and panicking. They also say stuff like, if you've got a university degree, you probably can't get an ADHD diagnosis because, well, you're intelligent. And ADHD is just for people that don't do well at school. So you get this panorama then coming out saying, well, everyone that goes privately is incorrect and they don't have ADHD. When in fact, it's just really hard. They didn't bring up the fact that, we know more about ADHD now than ever. That's why the diagnosing is going so high. We're now got healthcare catching up with women's health for the first time eventually, and especially with ADHD and autism, specifically with those, because they, like I said earlier, they really only looked at men and young boys. And we also now, post pandemic, I will bring it up, social media mass awareness. It's making it so that people are starting to realize, oh, no, that could be me. And I'm not just wrong in my life. There is something that's causing all of this. So yeah, I would say there is quite a lot of stigma at the moment, and it's quite hard to fight it sometimes when you're trying to advocate for yourself because you get tired. I mean, this is what I'm saying all the time because it's a dopamine deficiency, which means you just don't want to do things that don't make you happy. And the fact is, fighting constantly to have someone listen to you about an issue that's been really making you struggle, sorry, it's not fun. You don't get happy about it. So you just get tired. And you also have on top of it ADHD. So you already lack the motivation, you already forget everything, and you lose the hope to deal with it.
Just gonna
So yeah,
stop you there. Sorry. I know you were saying something really important. It's just we've got like 2.5 minutes left. I don't want to rush this. So what I might do is just put a pin in it for now, and then we're gonna come back to it because there are a few extra points that I want to bring up. Um, yeah, hold on a second.
no worries.
Here we go. So, we spoke quite lengthily just there about the stigma of ADHD. You brought up the BBC documentary. But what are some of the good things about ADHD that people are overlooking or just not being able to see because people think of ADHD and then kind of think of all the stigma?
Yeah, so look, I know there's some bad things that can come with ADHD that can be quite challenging. I've spoken about the executive dysfunction. I didn't mention about the rejection sensitivity, which is just, feeling a bit, well, you kind of catastrophize things quite quickly because you feel as though people are rejecting you. There's also the memory issues where you just forget everything and anyone. Anyone is a big one because even if your friends aren't around, you just immediately assume they don't exist anymore. Um, but there are good things about it, and I don't like to use the word, but I'm going to use it because it's used quite a lot in social media. There is a superpower in ADHD in that you do have this ability to hyperfocus and you do have the hyperactivity. I mean, some people maybe won't appreciate the hyperactivity part, but it's there, it's there for a reason. It really helps with your day-to-day life when you need it, especially and I feel like this a lot when I got into my law degree because at school, sometimes there were just subjects where I really, really could not get my teeth into. I just hated it. And I'll go back to the hob. I didn't want to study it. Science was one of them. Um, in fact, I actually had, this is just off topic, but to reference my hyperactivity, I had a biology teacher. It was in my GCSEs, and he said, I feel like if anyone, my friends listen to this, they'll just get annoyed by me because I always say it. He, there was a girl in year 13 and I was in year 11, and he said, she's just about to leave school because it was around exam time. Once she leaves, you will officially be the loudest girl in this school. Well, actually, the loudest person, not even just girl. He really had
That
some
was
kind of an
so
issue with me
rude.
talking all
Oh
the
my
time. I
God.
know. No, he was great, but I like my hyperactivity came out in biology classes. Why? Because I didn't care for them. I just didn't like them. And I always did the work. It was never the issue. My hyperactivity is never disruptive. Well, it is for other people, not for myself. I guess that's the point. But when I really enjoy things, I focus so hard. And so coming into law, when I did, for example, my dissertation, I would like wake up some days so excited and I would just write. I would just read and I would write because I really enjoyed the subject that I was doing. I found a lot in some of like my law modules and stuff. I really enjoyed it. And I would like read and I'd be like, wow, this is really easy. And like it would take like I don't know, a 3 hour piece of work would take me an hour. Not, I'm a very slow reader, so not the reading part, but the rest of it, a 3 hour piece of work would take me an hour because I'm just so in the zone on it. I'm not distracted in the slightest, and it gets done so incredibly quickly and so incredibly efficiently because
What
I'm
topics, like
enjoying it.
just to give some people like context, like what
Oh, of
topics,
course.
like yeah, I'm guessing if you say like land law or rent, there's going to be some kind of uproar from the listeners.
Never. Um, it it was around Mental Health Act and what Mental Capacity Act. So it was basically my dissertation. I'll give an idea of that. Was about how there's a new mental health bill coming out, and it kind of leaves a lot of people with autism in the dark slightly in terms of they cannot. So that just in brief, the mental health bill is saying that they can't be detained in mental health hospitals because it's unethical and it impacts their life quite drastically, which it does. I worked in them and I worked with them. I think that's why I had a personal attachment to this dissertation because I've spoken to them, I've interacted, I understand, I've tried to support as much as I can with it, but the reality always was that there was nowhere in the community for them to be discharged to. So then they end up what should only be months of being in a mental health hospital, a decade, and it's the most bizarre, beyond horrendous situation for them to be in. And they tried to counteract this by saying, fine, don't be in the hospitals. Okay, but I feel like we've missed the root cause here in that there is nowhere in the community for them to be.
I was
And
gonna
so I
ask
just wrote my
where
whole
would they
dissertation
go?
on what do we do? Yeah, my whole point. So I think my title was Violent and Vulnerable. Um, how, like, basically, how are we going to deal with this between the Mental Health Act and the Mental Capacity Act? How can we address this issue? It's quite a hard one because generally the answer is always fund things better.
That
Um,
yeah, that tends
but
to
I
be the
really
theme.
enjoyed it. I know, yeah. It was either fund things or take them back to the hospitals, which both were really bad options, but
Just throw a bit
yeah.
of money at it. It should work. We'll figure something out.
Yeah, it was hospitals and training is always kind of my conclusion there because it's hard when if you have autism, sometimes it can display in quite violent actions, not necessarily always intentional either. And you need to have properly trained people to support them, a lot of people like in the hospitals, it would get so violent and they'd break someone's arm or they'd need to be restrained or they'd need to be subdued in some way. And people can't just do that out in the community on their ones. We do law, we get it.
Yeah.
It's not something you can do without having some kind of legal repercussion if you're, for example, restraining someone. So, and then you have to pay them more because it's a harder job than just, being a nurse. I mean, nurses are hard jobs, but when there's a risk of, to your life or to your injury to your life as well, you should
No,
really get paid
definitely.
more for that too. But yeah,
I
so,
mean,
but it
there's
was
a
very,
theme of
again, I could go on to it forever, but
I mean, there is a theme of underfunding. We see that with the NHS and like private practices
yeah,
kind of cropping up and becoming more and more normal for people to be a part of because they're just getting better healthcare from private practices as opposed to the NHS, which is again something that COVID definitely
good.
put a lot of light and information on. Um,
Yes.
but again, not the point of this podcast episode, so we're not gonna get too much into it. But you said like you've got a master's, you've got a law degree, you're very, very well educated, clearly you're very well spoken. But someone with who finds out you've got ADHD might underestimate you, might not take you as seriously. So like at
Yeah.
universities and like for example, I know like you're studying the BPC like I am, so you're wanting to be a barrister. What can these places do or what what do you think are they already doing that is good or that is helpful to people with ADHD? Because someone could be listening to this and not know that they are deserving of help. Like there is something that they can put some kind of pressure on their institution to give them help. So in your experience, what has been done to help you, or what more can be done to help you?
Yeah. So yeah, it's a really good question. Um, I might take it by university first and then work and kind of they can overlap in some places,
Yeah,
but
yeah, go ahead.
specifically with my experience with law, because I only got diagnosed from the beginning of my master's, so this undergrad doesn't count for me. I didn't get any help because I didn't know. But during my master's and during this BPC, they've given it's called a ULIP agreement. So it's an agreement that kind of gives you extra support or help. So one of it being that you can get extra time in an exam. I think you can sometimes get extra materials in. So for example, when I had to do my exams for my master's, we could get paper copies of everything. And for some people, it helped a lot more because they could make their own notes like that instead of on the computer, which kind of fumbled their brain a little bit. Um, yeah, so they also kind of they have some support in that you can go to the disability services and you can kind of they're quite flexible with the kind of support you need. So you can just tell them, look, I need this, this, and this, and they'll see what they can do. Um, Law itself was really good at recommending that I get uh, government support. So that kind of looked in the form of I don't know how you explain it. What is it called? The Disability Student Allowance. I think that's what it's called, DSA. So you get money, not physical money, that would be lovely, but no. They kind of pay for you to have things to support you. So I got a laptop out of it because I was only working from an iPad and it was glitching every 5 seconds. And I was ready to throw it, and they were like, no, don't do that. Like we can get you a laptop, that's okay. You do have to pay excess, so that was a bit annoying, but it's just because I wanted one that would last. So, what
Pay
else did I get? I
excess.
got
What do you mean?
headphones. So if you want, they can give you a standard. So basically, there's a big long list of pretty much any laptop that you want, and you can request it to them. You can get a Mac if you want, but they only pay for like an initial amount so that everyone's fair, because obviously it wouldn't be fair to buy someone a Mac and buy another person like a really, like £200 computer.
Yeah.
So they make it fair in that they make it they give you software to download onto it. So they download it all for you. They give you software, um, which can help sometimes. So it can be like a speak to text thing, or it can be a mind mapping software. I can't remember what else I've got at the moment. But they'll download it all for you onto your laptop, and then they also pay for like an initial fee of the laptop. But then if it's a more expensive one, you just have to pay the money on top of that, which is
Oh,
fine. If you have it, it's good. Otherwise, you can still like they do still provide some laptops uh pretty much for free.
so there is support
Good.
there to some extent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah. At least with, like I've got these headphones where um they pick up things quite quickly and they'll put it all into text. And then I've got they give everyone, I think, those like little mini recording devices, which generally, and ULaw have said this, but I'm not sure what they said about the BPC. But when I was in my master's, they definitely said that you can take this recording device and put it in every single class and just record the whole class. Because actually, I didn't touch on this. One of the other symptoms of ADHD is or like issues with auditory processing. So, what I mean by that is I don't hear what everyone else hears. And it's probably partially to do with the inattention, but also just my brain doesn't compute. So, for example, if I'm in class and the teacher is talking and I'm trying to make notes, I won't hear a single word the teacher has said. I will hear the words different. It's almost like obviously it's not dyslexia, but I feel like it's akin because you're hearing different words, you're hearing different things, and then you can't make sense of it a lot.
Like, so
Um,
you can't multitask, is how I'm understanding it. Like,
it's not the multitasking,
Mhm.
it's listening. So even if like so me and you, if you were just chatting to me and you were talking a lot for a long time, or not necessarily even that long, but you were just talking a lot, my brain will not register everything. Even if I'm looking at you and all of my attention is nowhere else, I just don't always hear what you're saying.
Right, right. Yeah.
That's the best way to put it.
Something to
Yeah.
be aware of.
Quite a funny one, actually. It's actually one of the more funnier uh, traits of ADHD. I mean, obviously, it's terrible because when I'm in class, my notes are a mess. Which is also then, so to go back, sorry, just to go back to, what the uni's been doing, they they generally can provide like pre-recorded lectures for you because they know that like the first time hearing it, you're probably not going to catch it. So there's that opportunity to repeat it or speed it up because we all like to speed up a lecture so that it's not so droning. Sorry to all the teachers out there. Um, just get it over and done with as quick as possible. So that's helpful from the university too. Yeah, we can talk about work stuff as well
Yeah, I
because
was
I did
gonna say
obviously I have been
maybe.
working as well. And
Yeah, go
I know
ahead.
other people that have been in work. Yeah. So okay, right. So I think I'll go into what I think can be helpful because I would like to see this. If I were to kind of, reach out to a future employer, especially in law, because I mean, technically we're all self-employed if we're barristers, but someone, let's say I'm in pupillage or something, it would just be nice to know that someone's got your back a little bit. And this kind of goes back to the stigma because I know, and myself included, people don't bring up their disabilities because immediately they're then the like, managers or people within your team are then like, oh, another person that we kind of have to like tiptoe around or we have to be especially accommodating for. And they complain that we're not being supportive enough, etc. And like you almost feel like you're a bit of a burden. So one of my main points is actually managers, I think, should be trained about ADHD and autism. I'll keep the neurodivergent spectrum here. They should be trained to know what it is, how it presents, how you can help it, even if it's just in terms of like helping with emotional regulation. I'm not asking them to be my therapist. I'm just asking them to maybe sometimes you know, let me not overthink things. So, this comes back to the rejection sensitivity where you just feel like you're constantly not doing a good job. And if they tell you, even though you are maybe doing a good job and they just kind of don't really give you any inclination of it, you lose motivation to do it. I'm
I
not saying
have.
necessarily that this, yeah.
Yeah, I have a story. I went to a networking event actually. It was a networking lunch. And in there, she was a family law solicitor. She owned her own law firm. She was so cool. And she mentioned that either it was her friend, I think it was, who told her that the person that works alongside her friend is on the neurodivergent scale. And if she were to leave, they would then essentially fire her because her job rests on him. And even though she's absolutely excellent at her job and she finds like her attention to detail is completely unmatched, they would essentially let her go if he were to move because they would feel as if they've got no other use for her, which I think is quite odd. Because
Yeah.
I would always assume, well, if she's a good worker and and she's making like it's a firm, so obviously you've got to make them money. And if she's making the money and she's doing a very good job at it, I would then want to find her a role, even if that meant carving it out. And maybe from a logistic perspective, that might be quite hard. But it was quite I don't know, it was quite eye-opening because I thought that was quite ruthless. But then, like firms and chambers, and just like on a very general scale, businesses, they are a business. They've got a bottom line to think of.
Yeah.
So that's like they have to be kind of harsh about things as well. But it did
Yeah.
just genuinely blow my mind a bit, like to kind of think if he were to move on to a different career and he couldn't take her with him in terms of like going up the ladder or wherever it is that he wants to do, she would lose a job, which it was just quite
Mm.
concerning to some extent.
Yeah. Lack of reassurance there entirely, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I think. it's fine. Like you said, they are at the end of the day businesses and they do need to be quite clear about things. Actually, in fact, maybe them pre-warning her was a positive part of it. I think for me, definitely, I wouldn't want to be, jumped on immediately after he leaves, if you know what I mean. Like I'd
Yeah.
like the pre-warning, but also then it makes quite a hostile work environment because you don't feel valued. So then there's that part as well.
Is it like a catch-22 knowing situation,
Yeah,
perhaps?
definitely. Sounds like it anyway.
Def-
Um, well, so other bits I guess that could help aside from, you know, I'm like I said, like I don't want to go too much in it about, it's anyone's personal responsibility to be taking care of someone. It isn't, and obviously I need to make that clear, but I do think it would be valuable for people to just know more about things instead of just immediately assuming there's something bad about ADHD. It almost like like I was saying earlier, like I don't like telling people a lot of the time because I don't want them to have a different perception of me. And I want them to understand that I will always work hard. And this is the point, everyone with ADHD does work extremely hard. And generally the field that they're going into is probably one of their really big interests and will give them dopamine anyway. So they are going to work really hard. They just need help with the more boring stuff. And I know like with my old job, I certainly struggled with it. For example, like all the admin or like going to meetings. Um, so like I think we shouldn't like, oh, and this comes into the um neurotypical versus neurodivergence where you have to act and be a certain way. For example, in the office. So I personally would want to fidget quite a lot. I would want to walk around quite a lot. I'd need to expend my energy in some certain ways. And that's not necessarily normal. People would rather, necessarily prefer you to just stay at your desk and be silent and get on with your work and chill and stop distracting people, etc., etc. But forget that once that part of me is like released, I fidgeted, now I'm chill, I've gone for a walk or I've chatted to someone a little bit more, I then can get on with my work because it's like exited my brain a bit. And I also think that kind of goes into flexible start and finish times. I think it's really difficult to be expected, like I was saying, like with the showering thing. If I'm expected to be somewhere at a certain time, that's fine, but then a lot of my day gets hijacked, or a lot of like because I'm processing things completely differently and not in my own times. So for me, I'm a morning person. So if I start work at 9, I've wasted 3 hours of my day because I would rather get up at 6 and do work. Or and then I've got to stay until 5. And I know that I stop functioning after like 3 p.m. And I think if people were more flexible about that, which is actually a really positive thing coming out of the pandemic, because you are now getting jobs that are very flexible in start and finish times because they just know that, people will get the work done as and when they need to, just let them do it in their own way.
One
It also
second.
helps if you're,
Yeah,
yeah,
just on the flexible point, I've got a question. When we've got, so our
yeah,
classes are scheduled quite differently. So we've got like 9 a.m. classes and we work till 1:15, I think it is. There's two classes
yeah,
there for anyone that's listening. It's not just like one big log. So
yeah.
when you've got like that break after, so say our first class finishes at 11 and then you've got a break and then your next class is scheduled at like 2, is that like a good form of flexibility for yourself? Is that like a good break to have in between and then you can think, okay, I can dispense of some of my energy, then I can go back to it? Or would you prefer it to be done and then kind of think, okay, now I can focus differently?
So good question. Different answers I'm going to give you right now because I consider classes something, sorry to you, Law, forced upon me, as most
Okay.
people will, because it's not my chosen way to study things and it's not my chosen times. Um, for me, doing the thing that I find the most mentally draining, which is being at class, because you have to be really on it. You have to have prepared everything beforehand. You need to kind of finish up after. You need to be present for 4 hours for us in one lot. Um, Funnily enough, is better to do it all in one go because, and something my partner always says, you eat the biggest frog first. At the beginning of the day, you eat the biggest frog, and then you feel accomplished with your day, and then you can move on. Um, but then there's the other option, and this is why I'm giving you two answers. The other option is I do class in the morning, so say you, and then I get a 2 hour break. Say we do get that, and it starts at like 3 again. So we've got 9 to 11, break until like 3. I'm forced because I commute. I'm forced to then stay at university, or even if I don't commute, like you know, if I live 2 seconds away, I wouldn't want to go back and wouldn't want to go back home and come back because I've got to be in anyway. I can't be bothered to do the 4 million times of moving around. So I would be forced to stay at university, and in that time, I will find myself eventually getting bored enough to do the work I don't want to do. So there's that positive part of it. Um, so I can't really give you a very straight answer here, Amina. I'm sorry,
No, it's
because
okay.
either way, being forced to be at university means I'm going to get some of the work that I really don't want to do get done. And that's a positive in its own right. Because so we finish generally, if we finish at 1, I don't get home then until 3. I've lost all of my energy for the day.
Yeah.
Um, and then I struggle. I struggled then to move on. And so perhaps, what your suggestion is would be a better one because I can get all of that, load of work that I really can't be asked to do in. And then when I'm tired, I'm doing the class. But because I'm being forced to do the class, I have to do it and I'll do it and I'll be present. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, can you like work on the way home, or do you think like I have to debrief, I have to kind of like not do anything? Because for me personally, as soon as class ends, I'll I'll go to like the library and maybe do some printing or maybe do a bit of work, but my brain just will not work. So I have to have like at least an hour, hour and a half of a break before I can get up and do anything else. And on a course like the BP
Yeah,
is so demanding, something that feels like a bit of a waste of time. But if I don't do it, I'm just going to be sitting there aimlessly at my laptop, which is even more of a waste of time. So how does that work for
yeah.
you?
Okay, so in theory, I'm the opposite because, and this comes into one of my tips and tricks that can help because, and I've always said this. So one of the big ones of ADHD is process in which you enter executive dysfunction is, I don't know whose theory it is, the theory of motion. Something that's constantly moving will always move. Something that stops will remain stopped. So the whole idea is if I need to get stuff done, I am not allowed to stop because the minute I stop, I am done. For the rest of the day, I am done. Even if I really want to get something done, the executive dysfunction hits very aggressively. And I will rather, and this has happened, stare at my ceiling, my blank white ceiling for 4 hours, stressing than doing anything. So, no is the answer. I will continue to move.
Continue to work to get it done. Yeah.
And that's one of my tips to help. I mean, obviously other people have different ways to do it, but it's one of my things is like included in that, keep your shoes on. When you get home, keep your shoes on. Why? Because your shoes mean you're doing something. Such a funny
You
one,
don't take your
but it
shoes off
really
at
helps.
home.
No, well, I have now because I'm really sick of it getting very dirty. But like I put slippers on, and
Right.
so that's a
Yes.
form of shoes for me. Like more sturdy slippers. So if I put on my comfy slippers, that's not that's not going to work.
No.
So I put on some like fairly sturdy, it's like house shoes, but shoes. They are still shoes.
Right.
Um, and it just means that I feel like I have to be doing things constantly, and I get things done with my shoes on.
I
Yeah, it's a
really
very
like that.
strange phenomenon. I don't, yeah,
It's strange, but like to me, for some reason, the way you've
it
explained it, it
works.
makes sense.
Yeah. It's like we've got business, and then when you take your shoes off, business is done.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
What other tips and tricks do you have that like someone listening could use or maybe look into?
Okay, so I'm just going to quickly touch back on what work can help you with because I'm using it in personal life. If, for example, work or university doesn't help me with this. So, one being, it is great for a job, I think, to be able to provide agendas ahead of meetings. I think it breaks down everything. It helps you with your own personal attention because you can point at it's kind of like signposting every bit that you know, say you do lose your process in your brain, inevitable with ADHD. Um, you can come back and go, okay, we're on this subheading. We're here, we're in this topic. Instead of just completely losing your brain, feeling overwhelmed, and then completely ignoring the entire meeting, trying to catch up. I also think that specifically written minutes after meetings are so vital. Like I said, with the auditory processing, anything and everything that you say to me with your mouth, I will not remember. I will not ever at all remember. This is memory and auditory processing working at the same time against me. Um, and how I personally help myself with this is if I'm speaking, so like especially in a professional context, if I'm speaking to someone, I will email them after with written up understanding of everything that they've said, just to make sure that I've got it, and then they can always add to it. Oh, well, you missed this bit out or whatever, or no, you misheard me here. I said this. And then you have it in writing, and then you don't have to rely on your very slightly, pretty much shoddy memory to figure out what they said. Um, I also, obviously, I said about the shoes. I think body doubling is a huge one. And this is also something that I think workplaces and I mean, universities aside, because it's quite independent work, but work definitely can help. You can do it for yourself, body doubling. If I need to do a piece of work, take me to the library with you. Do anything you want. Do your taxes. Not that any of us here are self-employed and earn a lot of money, but do something. Do anything that you're just kind of forcing me to feel like I need to do this. It's like I'm a cat. Like I just want to do exactly what you're doing. So body doubling really like it's vital for me. I really struggle when I'm on my own, especially because when you're body doubling, you're able to kind of get reassurance from the person that you're with. So a lot of the time, I think with ADHD, like I was saying about the confidence issues, you really start to doubt yourself extremely quickly. You catastrophize everything. Um, and they can just go, no, you're being black and white. You're being too strict on yourself. You're being harsh. That's fine. Blah blah blah. Let's get on with it. And you're like, okay, great. Let's get on with it. Um, I would say my final big point is exercise. Exercise everything, and I am not following it myself either
I was gonna
because
ask,
I
do you
forget
get
all the
time
time.
to go to the gym?
No, I should. The fact is, you can always make time, and I don't make time because I get overwhelmed and stressed. But I always feel the benefits of exercise, and especially with ADHD, because if you exercise first thing in the morning before you do anything else in your day, you have like, okay, I'm not a scientist, I'm not going to give the right facts on this, but you pretty much double your dopamine for that day. And it means that you are working on an excess amount of dopamine, and you can almost use it up on all the boring stuff after because you feel good, you feel pumped, you're excited, the endorphins are running around your body, and you feel accomplished as well. You've done something quite big in general world exercising. I think for people that struggle with like for me, like it takes 3 spoons to shower. Um, Exercise is quite a big one too, and to be able to get it the first thing in the morning, you feel accomplished with your day, and you've then also increased your dopamine again because you feel good. Um, Obviously, I would touch on the medication, but it's one that only professionals can really give loads of advice on. I think I did take medication for a time, but the side effects did affect me a bit. So that's a very, very personal one, I would say. But yeah. And also as a very slight aside, I did like for me, a lot of the support that I found in terms of tips and tricks, they are all personal. Everyone has kind of different ways of dealing with ADHD because, they've got like say they're more hyperactive than inattentive, etc., or the other way around. Just go on TikTok or go on social media. I know people say not to, but that's where the personal experiences are. That's where the people that you can find like-mindedness with. It's not always going to be with your friends. It's not always going to be with your family. Sometimes people just really don't understand you. And yeah, social media is okay. I don't know why it has such a bad stigma. But yeah, that's my advice to people.
If you send me over your like TikTokers or social media that you use, I'll try and put like a link or something like that up on the screen. So if anyone is listening, they can kind of just go directly to it or search for it on their own time. But that does bring us to the end of our episode. So thank you so much for being here, Ilka, and speaking to us about ADHD. I hope you had a nice time on the podcast, although I did give you like a lot of creative control. I'm not sure if you wanted me to kind of put my input a bit more or something, but either way,
Oh,
thank
it's
you so
good. I
much for
enjoyed
being
it.
here. Um,
Yeah, thank you.